I measure my days in things that click shut. Sterilization pouches sealed with heat, the autoclave latching with a hollow thunk, the door to our apartment near Willow Glen that sticks if you do not lift it slightly before the deadbolt slides into place. I like closed loops, clean edges, the certainty of a tray laid out exactly, mirror, explorer, cotton pliers so that the dentist's hand never meets surprise. I am 33, a dental assistant with night classes 2 evenings a week and a part-time obsession with coupon codes. I can stretch a bag of jasmine rice to cover 6 lunches. I know which aisles in the All-Madden Expressway Costco hide the best markdowns. I do not miss payments. My shoes are always lined toe to heel by the door. Daniel enters rooms like a conversation you have to lean toward. He is 5 years into tech, newly minted product lead at a crypto startup that sometimes seems to exist mostly in the latency between 2 Slack pings. He has an ease in the shoulders that reads as generosity on first pass and evasiveness on the second. He makes dinner with a speed that looks like care. He says words like runway and tranche and burn with a fluency that suggests a secret choir behind them, humming. The first time I drove to Palo Alto and set foot in his co-working space, I thought I had slipped into a laboratory designed to study people who like to be told they are reinventing something. Everything was white and oak and felt panels, air set to the temperature of an idea. The cold brew taps were spotless. The snack wall felt curated by a committee who worried even their almonds might be too loud. He told me it helped him focus. He worked best when noise was filtered to zeros and ones. I took 280 because that is what you do when you grow up here. It carries your mornings as if it were the only arterial worth trusting, breath coming straight from the city's chest. Past the billboard that changed from fintech to luxury senior living in a single week. Past the stretch with oaks leaning like they wanted to say something but had agreed not to. Past the ridge that made my old Civic wheeze. At night I would come back the same way with the autopilot of someone who keeps commitments slotted like trays in a sterilizer, a life that hums because you feed it steady. He framed the first money movement as temporary. That word took up less space than it deserved. He had an investor whose funds would not clear in time for something that could not wait, and he needed a bridge. He used the phrase emergency bridge loan as if emergencies came preformatted with solutions built in. It was a known pattern, he said. He would unwind it in a week. Our safety net was not so much a net as a quilt, my careful savings from clinic work and his sporadic bonuses, bits of stimulus I never spent, the refund from a canceled Lake Tahoe rental, the little money my mother had insisted I'd take when she moved out of state. He folded a corner of the quilt and said it was just for a night. He would pull it back over us before dawn. It is easy to misunderstand the scale of something when you love the narrator. The first transfer was 6,000. The second was 10. 6,000 looked like a number I could put back with overtime and night classes and a willingness to eat more lentils. 10 felt different. I asked how the investor could be the sort of person who was both essential and also pinned under clearing times like an insect under glass. He described it as the infrastructure of success. Big things always looked messy up close. I thought of my trays. I thought of our rent. I thought of how he could make an excuse sound like a door being held for someone else. Venmo filled itself with transactions to initials that meant nothing to me. He appeared with the frequency of a piece of punctuation. E for escrow, I assumed. E for expenses. E for everything necessary to get to the other side of the runway he said he was stretching. The descriptions were the language of plausible deniability, lunch, parking, supplies. Sometimes a maple leaf emoji. Sometimes a key. Sometimes a single dot, the period at the end of a sentence with no words. It did not feel like theft at first. It felt like rearrangement. We had a shared spreadsheet with a tab labeled safety. We took our tax refund 1 year and moved it there, and I wrote the amount in black ink on a post-it because I like to see numbers on paper before they vanish into cells. I did not cross it out when the amount changed. I moved the post-it behind a picture frame where it could sit like a memory of what had been true. The coworking locker appeared as a subtraction I could not parse. $45 monthly, then $55, then $65. It came from a name that matched the place with the cold brew taps, and I asked what it was without asking what it was because I have learned that in certain dynamics you can only knock on a door with the soft part of your knuckles. He explained it as a perk that was not free. He needed to stash a monitor, some headphones, an external drive too sensitive to leave in any common area. He was shipping features and could not carry weight. I am good with weight, so I carried that answer. I worked my shifts and I worked my nights and I cut coupons for a laundry detergent that does not make me itch. I made rice. I kept track of our toothbrush heads and changed them on schedule. I started to eat microwave broccoli in the break room because it is better for me than vending machine pretzels. I listened to colleagues talk about dysinilin lines and orthos and aches they woke into. I felt older than I am because when you are the person who counts, time is always heavier. I tried to set a rule, one emergency bridge loan at a time. It held until it didn't. The money outpaced my language for it. I began to ask for clarity about how much was in play, and he responded with charts that did not start at zero. He was building something, and he needed runway, and we needed to believe. I told him belief is a dental word to me. I believe calculus over hope. Enamel does not regrow itself because you are optimistic. He smiled with his shoulders again. He is very charming. The medical scare came with a specific smell. Every clinic shares it. Sharp and cold and faintly sugary, like a hand sanitizer made for children. He had been complaining of fatigue, then breathlessness on a hill we used to take for granted. He spoke of a chronic condition that had been dormant since college and had reared back up now that he was in his 30s. He had lab results, he said. He had a specialist in Menlo Park, he said. He could not be reached during certain hours because of treatments that made him woozy and then nauseous. He assured me it was not a crisis, only management, but management required privacy because he had investors who would not understand absence. He handed me paperwork once with the same flourish he used for flavored seltzer after a long run, an act of care that somehow also proved he had been caring all along. The printouts did not match each other. One had a typo in the clinic's name. One listed a treatment code that my brain recognized as dental, not medical, but I assumed codes overlapped across disciplines the way names do. He made his appointments on days when my classes ran late. He woke early for fasting labs on mornings when I had the first sterilization run. He misaligned his life with mine in ways that made it hard to push on them without looking like the kind of person who cannot accept suffering in someone else. When I did show up to a clinic unannounced once, the front desk asked for an order number I did not have and a last name I gave that did not produce the right chart. Their computer system was experiencing a software update. The receptionist spoke in the soft authority of people trained to move conflict into the future. I'm left with a free pen and a feeling I could not label because I am cautious about naming emotions before they have earned it. The next day he said the appointment had been rescheduled due to equipment maintenance. He said the clinic had newer machines on order. He said the world delays you when you are most determined. I placed the free pen in the kitchen drawer and avoided using it. The email that kept me away from our accounts for a week looked correct the way fake flowers look like flowers, which is to say it fooled a person who wanted to be fooled. The subject line referenced a compliance audit. The sender lived on a domain with a subdomain that mirrored one of our banks. The text explained that account access would be restricted to one authorized user, while systems were undergoing testing, and that any attempts to circumvent restrictions could trigger security hold. It recommended registering a temporary contact number. The number belonged to Daniel. He framed it as preventative security and insisted he would ride it out. He said we would be back to normal by Friday, then Monday, then Friday again. I held the end of a week in my hand and stretched it. I failed to notice a missing comma in the bank's name. I did notice that when I called the bank's general number and requested general help, I stayed on hold long enough to feel embarrassed about calling at all. I hung up and decided to wait because waiting has sometimes saved me from saying things I cannot unsay. Later, when the compliance audit ended as quietly as it began, I went into the email headers and read the string of letters and numbers that feel like the back of a tapestry, the part that reveals what the front is trying to hide. The domain had been registered 2 weeks earlier. The IP address landed in a place that did not match our bank. The language pattern mimicked previous alerts too perfectly. It had his efficiency embedded in it. It solved the problem of me, and I had stood still and watched it work. I work in a world that documents itself. Every extraction has a code, every sterilizer run has a log, every lost retainer has a timestamp. It feels like mercy to me that the universe can be made of records. I leaned into it. The rideshare receipts started as noise. He was often out late and cabs are overpriced compared to his app of choice when surge pricing decides to be kind. I am not his parent. If he wanted to expense it or not, that was his world. But in the compliance week, when my access to the accounts felt like a limb that had fallen asleep and would not wake, I opened our joint email to find something else and found a stack of rideshare receipts archived into a folder I had not created. My eyes open when they see a pattern. The receipts aimed at a boutique hotel that rebranded last year but kept the same eucalyptus water in its lobby. Sometimes Nabu-adjacent Palo Alto. Sometimes Menlo Park with a courtyard so quiet you could hear shoes choose their next step. The rides posted between 7 and 9 in the evening with a return sometime after midnight. The memo lines repeated investor. That word had been so softened by overuse that I almost did not notice it had gained weight. I took my highlighter to a printout and watched the yellow bloom around nights that were supposed to be late sprints with engineers. I thought of the sterile air at the co-working space where no one sweats or raises their voice, and I thought of the hotel where the carpet feels like a decision someone made to imply gravity. I looked up the hotel's keycard policy and learned that logs exist for everything, even the number of times a door thinks it has recognized a person. I am not a detective. I am someone who makes sure the suction tip is placed where it will do its job without tearing tissue. But I have a quiet faith in systems, and it turns out systems answered me when I spoke in the language they understood: confirmation emails, room service invoices, the polite paper trail of hospitality. The dates matched the receipts. The memos matched the nights. The investor did not exist in any way that would appear on a cap table. The second phone introduced itself as a sound. The HVAC return in our hallway developed a hum that had a rhythm error in it, a tiny stutter that did not match the symmetry of a fan. I thought something was loose. I turned off the thermostat and the hum continued, which felt like an insult to cause and effect. I unscrewed the cover with a screwdriver I should not have been able to find so quickly because it should have been in the toolbox, but the toolbox had drifted somewhere after our last move. The metal came away with a dry screech. There, in the mouth of the return, lodged between the grill and the ductwork, sat a thin rectangle in a soft case with stickiness of dust on it. I knew the shape before my hand knew it. The phone was on airplane mode and low power. It woke under my touch like it belonged to the room. I felt the particular nausea of recognizing an object you are not supposed to recognize. No lock screen would yield without a code, but you learn by watching someone. You learn the way their thumb moves. You learn their birthdays and their favorite numbers and the years that repeat. I tried what a person like Daniel would choose, and the phone agreed with me on the third attempt. The home screen held 3 rows of apps that pretended not to be what they were. Folders named articles and tools contained twins of everything that moves without leaving a trace, encrypted messaging, disappearing photos, vaults that disguise themselves as calculators. E was pinned to the top of the primary chat. The avatar was a lake at dusk from a place we had never visited. The most recent message contained a picture from a co-working kitchen with a caption about how the almond milk here tastes like weirdly sincere clouds. I do not drink almond milk. The message thread stretched back months. Words I did not read because I knew the act of consuming them would be an intimacy I did not consent to. Notifications showed recurring payments for a coworking locker, not just in Palo Alto, but in a satellite across the street from a patio where I once ate a sandwich in silence and felt like I was eavesdropping on an industry. The locker number repeated enough times to feel like an address: 413. I took a screenshot and then remembered I did not need a screenshot because the point was not to prove anything to anyone except myself. I returned the phone to airplane and slid it back where I found it because I am the sort of person who puts everything back. I cleaned the duct cover with a damp paper towel because I could not act like I discovered something ugly and then leave the dust to say I had. I found the Mountain View storage unit the way one might find a cavity: follow the ache, tap until the sound changes. The second phone contained a parking photo with a code in the corner. The code mapped onto a facility I had passed 100 times without thinking about it. I drove there on my lunch break with the office sandwich in a brown bag on the passenger seat like a companion. The rows of metal doors gleamed because someone had been told gleaming is what people want to see when they are hiding things. The manager did not need to know me. The keypad was enough. I am not proud of the ease with which one can enter a life that is not yours, but I am past pride now. The unit held a rack of designer clothes, all hang-tagged and unwrinkled, in sizes that matched him, not me, but styles he never wore in our life together. There were shoes with soles that looked like they had never seen pavement. There were unopened boxes of wellness supplements, the expensive kind with words like autophagy and adaptogen printed in fonts designed to be photographed. There was a small suitcase with prepaid debit card sleeves stacked like playing cards. There was a zippered pouch with receipts from stores that do not sell anything under $100. The air smelled like rubber and cardboard and something else under it, like the way money smells after it has been held in a pocket too long. I photographed nothing because I did not want a gallery of betrayal on my phone. I made a list in the memory palace I carry in my head, left to right, top to bottom. I know how to set trays, so I know how to index a shelf. I wondered when he had the time to stand here and select a shirt that said he was someone else. I wondered who he wanted to be when he zipped up the suitcase. I wondered when the supplements became the argument he used for disappearing. I ran the numbers the way you run your tongue over a sore tooth. Estimating retail felt like a tantrum disguised as math. I sat on the floor and ate half my sandwich and realized the ache of hunger was indistinguishable from the ache of realization if you keep quiet long enough. I tracked the prepaid debit cards because that was the thinnest part of the wall. Our joint accounts fed Venmo, Venmo fed cards. Cards disappeared off the map. Every now and then a card would reappear briefly at a place that sold things that wanted to be seen, a boutique, a hotel gift shop, a wellness clinic specializing in Roman IV drips with names that promise cognitive clarity. The names matched some of the supplement labels in the storage unit. The cadence of spending felt like a person who wanted to practice a lifestyle until the muscle memory took over. I pulled bank statements into a spreadsheet and color-coded the flows. Blues for salaries, grays for utilities, greens for savings transfers, yellows for charges I could not immediately categorize, reds for the emergencies that never returned to zero. My sheet looked like a flag for a country I would not choose to live in. The E on Venmo attached to several of the incoming and outgoing streams. Sometimes E transferred in small amounts with notes that made no sense to me, and then larger amounts went out through cards toward places where receipts do not feel like a conversation, they feel like a wink. I tried to remember the moment when the initial punctures of our budget became a tear I could not hide. I thought it was the week of the fake compliance audit. It occurred to me that maybe it was long before that, back when I agreed to believe in a word like runway in a house where the only thing that ever took off on schedule was me at 7 a.m., because morning huddles do not wait. The realization felt less like a revelation and more like the shape of a bruise finally revealing itself under the skin. Daniel asked that we place the condo title solely in his name for tax optimization. He framed the ask on a Sunday morning when people are at their softest. It was a one-bedroom in an older building not far from Willow, Glen that we purchased during a lull when prices felt like a dare we might accept. We had been renting out the condo for supplemental income because our apartment worked better for me for my commute, for the quiet I prefer. He had an advisor, he said. He had a spreadsheet. He had a sense of how the next year would unfold if we would just be nimble together. He was very convincing. He always is. The proposed deed transfer moved like frictionless code. A notary appointment appeared on a shared calendar I do not always check. An envelope marked with a mortgage lender's smile waited on the kitchen table with the loose casualness of a bottle cap, as if the documents inside belonged to the same category of small things that make the day go. I picked it up and felt the shift in the center of my body. I read the forms with the part of me that reads tray setups and sees when the cotton roll is placed where it will weaken saliva rather than block it. The language did not include me. The tax optimization leaned entirely on my consent, the way a bad extraction leans on an instrument that would rather do something else. I Googled the notary's number and canceled the appointment from my car in the parking lot of a Safeway where I had gone for lemons I no longer needed. I told the notary that we were rescheduling due to an internal error. The phrase tasted like someone else's mouth. I put the lemons back. He became a person when I let her stop being a letter. I did not want to see her face. I did not want to know if my instincts would try to make me hate her. The second phone, however, had other plans. The message thread contained photos that were not meant for me. I scrolled past them like I was driving past a wreck and refusing to slow down. There were screenshots of flights purchased on points and then reimbursed with these same prepaid cards. There were references to angel checks and due diligence that read like a costume someone puts on to get past a guard. There were mentions of my name as a variable in a model, an inconvenience to be resolved through explanation and optimization. I learned that E was the sort of person who calls herself efficient as a personality trait. I learned that she had funded parts of Daniel's lifestyle that he would have called fractional ownership if asked. I felt less interested in her and more interested in my own blood pressure. I pictured my capillaries as straw-sized tubes in a biology lab diagram, red and blue arrows pointing in directions that needed to stay true. I breathed like we tell the anxious kids to breathe when they grip the chair arms and stare at the ceiling tiles as if they are maps of safe exits. I asked myself how to proceed like a person who wants to live a long time. I did not confront either of them with words. I do not trust words to do what facts can. There is a time for sentences and a time for ledgers. I chose ledgers. I compiled a timeline on a Sunday afternoon when the light along the hallway turns citrus. I printed my bank statement flags and layered them with the Rija receipts. I requested my own medical billing records and looked for the place where his alleged clinic might have crossed my insurance like a shadow. I filed a request with the co-working space for copies of locker rental invoices under the consumer privacy provisions that companies now have to answer to. The form asked me to certify my relationship to the person. I certified my relationship to myself. That was the point. Calendar entries from the notary. Email headers from the fake compliance notice. A copy of the storage unit's access log with entries that matched his treatment afternoons. A snail trail of prepaid debit card numbers ending up in place names that scored a map of the peninsula like dotted lines in a children's book. I sorted everything into sections like I would for an OSHA inspection. One binder, 12 tabs, each labeled with the sort of neutrality that makes the person reading lean closer because neutrality itself is suspicious during harm. I set the binder on the coffee table. Daniel came home humming the piece of music I recognized as the placeholder tune he hums when he wants to appear relaxed. I did not speak. I am proud of that. I do not think I could have kept my voice from being the wrong instrument, and this is not a composition I wanted to ruin. I watched his eyes land on the binder and then look away. He set his keys down next to it the way a person does when they are making an unremarkable gesture on purpose. I felt the world contract to the 3 feet between my knees and the binder's corner. Time behaved badly inside our apartment. It stretched and then it snapped back. He picked up the binder and then placed it back down without opening it. He requested a drink with his hands, not with words, and his hands failed to persuade me. He moved toward the bedroom and stopped at the hall like the carpet had informed him of a risk ahead. He turned, sat on the edge of the couch, then stood again. He went for the HVAC return like a person following muscle memory, and stopped when he saw the screws seated too neatly to have been recently disturbed. He ran a hand over his face, and my chest recognized that gesture as one of his favorites when he had no script. My phone vibrated on the table. It was a fraud alert about a login attempt on one of our joint accounts from a device not recognized. I approved nothing. He moved toward the door and then did not. I kept breathing like we tell the anxious kids to breathe. There was no dramatic conclusion, no sound of a thing breaking. There was simply air and 2 people in it, and a binder that told the story without me. I move money the way you move a tongue away from a sore tooth because touching it only hurts. I separated my direct deposit from our joint account to my own. I called the bank during my lunch break and then called back on my 10-minute afternoon slot because they placed me on hold so long the first time that I could hear the elevator music in my teeth. I requested freezes on my credit profiles at all the bureaus. I set a lock for my mobile carrier because phone numbers are doors. I turned on alerts so small charges would ping me like a smoke alarm. I wrote down every account on a sheet of paper I will burn when this is over. He sent texts that I did not answer because my thumbs were not instruments I trusted anymore. He left the apartment at hours he used to spend coding or sleeping or believing in his own spin. The coworking locker recurring charge continued another month and then stopped. The storage unit's access log went quiet. I canceled the notary again. I returned to the Mountain View unit one last time and took nothing because nothing in that room belonged to the person I was trying to protect. At work, I held irrigating syringes at an angle that makes the solution flow where it should, not into the throat of someone who is already having a hard day. I switched trays and noted sport tests and talked a teenager through the idea that braces can be a kind of identity you later shed. I watched my dentist, who likes to say that most of what we do is teach people to believe in boring care. I thought about boring care. I thought about how boring things save you: floss, budgeting, making your bed, showing up to a shift you do not feel like doing. I told my mother in a way that preserved the part of me that still works. I reported facts like I am writing them here. I omitted any adjectives that would make me cry. She offered to fly down, and I said no because people arriving feels like a fork in the road that you can't untake. She asked if I was safe. I told her I am safe like a person who has their credit frozen, a P.O. box rented, and a separate keychain that holds nothing that can open what is his. She asked if I needed money. I told her I will be okay, because that is part of the job of being a daughter who has made a life out of being okay. I slept at a friend's place for a week and told her I was between things. She offered me her couch and her quiet. She did not ask for details, because she is one of those rare people who trusts you when you say the word complicated. I lay on her couch with a blanket that smelled like detergent more expensive than mine, and listened to the upstairs neighbor's washing machine turn and turn. I thought about rotation as stability. I thought about cycles that end. I drove to the co-working space one morning and sat in the lobby with my coffee as if I belonged. The air was perfectly conditioned. The plants were the color of a promise. I watched a man in a hoodie draw a map on a notepad with arrows and boxes like he was explaining a future to someone who would pay for it. I thought of Daniel's shoulders and how they leveraged likability into time. I felt a clean anger move through me like an irrigation flush. It did not look like revenge. It looked like clarity. I am writing this as an act of self-rescue, not a plea. I am not seeking to implode an image of him in public or to harvest a thread of vindication. I am recording what happened because recording is how I know I exist outside of another person's story. I am laying out the instruments on a tray so that anyone walking into this room can see exactly what is present and what is not. I am naming E not by name but by function, because the fact that she was not an investor but a romantic partner matters only insofar as it explains the money. The money moved through prepaid debit cards because prepaid debit cards do not ask about intent. The bridge loans exceeded the span they claimed to cross. The fake compliance audit was designed to discipline my questions. The medical scare was inconsistent on paper because it was inconsistent in truth. There was a second phone in the HVAC return because he preferred to live in the vents of his own life, where air moves but accountability does not. There was a storage unit in Mountain View with designer clothes he did not wear in our home, and supplements that made platform promises about rewriting yourselves. There were rideshare receipts to a boutique hotel where investor nights were apparently funded by someone's angel. There was a sudden request to move a title into his sole name to optimize taxes I would then be responsible for paying, in both senses. There was a binder, and a man who would not open it, and a woman who finally understood that the only thing worth optimizing now is her own oxygen. I disentangled the finances one call at a time. I froze the credit. I filed the reports. I changed the passwords. I canceled the notary again and again until the calendar tired of me. I notified the landlord I might be vacating before the lease expires and accepted the penalty as tuition. I arranged to sell a couch we picked together and discovered that the market for second-hand couches is less bleak than the market for second chances. I made rice again, because rice is a thing my hands know. There will be people who ask why I did not leave earlier, why I did not tear the ductwork apart the first time I heard the hum, why I did not treat the first emergency bridge loan like a fire alarm. I have answers that sound like explanations and answers that sound like prayers. Mostly I have this: I believe the person who narrated my life with me, because believing together is one of the ways you love. When the narration turned against me, I chose to stop supplying a soundtrack. I wrote this because survival sometimes looks like walking away without the last word. I do not want the last word. I want a room I can sleep in and a future that feels like it belongs to a person who knows the weight of objects and the comfort of routine. I want my dog-eared night class textbook open on a table that is mine. I want to commute 280 under the billboard that changes and know that my route is not a loop but a line. There is a finality in the click of a credit freeze confirming. There is a strange peace in a binder closing and sliding back into a cabinet. There is a mouthwash blue clarity to the moment You realize that the absence of dialogue is its own kind of safety. I'm Mia. I live near Willow Glen. I take the highway to work and back. I am frugal, observant. I am not a character in a startup romance. I will not be optimized. Tomorrow I will restock this sterile packs and run the sport test and take the night class quiz on pharmacology that I keep putting off. I will go home to a place that contains only what I can account for. I will leave the vent cover screwed down firmly, and I will not listen for a phone that is no longer there. I will practice boring care like it is a skill, because it is. I will keep breathing. That is the only audit that matters.